Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies webinar, Leading Your Hybrid Team. Thank you so much for joining us today. Next slide, please. It's a pleasure to have you all here this afternoon. My name is Lisa Beckham, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. If you have future questions about this webinar or other programs we offer, my contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. Next slide, please. There are some logistical items I'd like to address before we begin. I ask that you please submit your questions throughout the webinar so we can address them during the Q&A portion of this presentation. To submit your questions, click the Q&A button towards the bottom of your screen, type your question, and select Enter or Return on your keyboard. There's also live captioning available for viewing if you click the CC button towards the bottom right side of the screen. We do have an interactive webinar planned for you today, which I'm really excited about. That will involve polling through a mobile device. To participate in the polling for today's session, please have your mobile device ready. There will be further instructions on how to participate later in the webinar. We will also send an email within a week with a link to the recording of this webinar. The link will be sent to the email address you submitted during the registration process. I'm delighted to introduce the topic for today's webinar, Leading Your Hybrid Team. As perspectives on remote versus on-site work effectiveness evolve, many organizations are moving to a hybrid model. Are you apprehensive about what this will look like for your team now or at some point in the future? Even if you've been working with a hybrid or fully remote team for a while, you may find there are more questions than answers. Many employees are watching carefully to see how organizations and managers listen to their input on preferred work arrangements. As a leader, it's important that you strategize how to set the stage for a successful team experience by resetting expectations and managing ambiguity. During this webinar, we'll explore how your hybrid team may look and act differently now, your leader mindset in helping navigate team pain points, considerations for diversity, equity, and inclusion in a hybrid setting, and strategies for engaging the team in ongoing collaboration and innovation. I'm absolutely delighted and honored to introduce the presenter for today's webinar, Karen Gotch. Karen, we've been working together for a while, but as a founder and principal of Global Collaboration Insights, Karen Gotch partners with her clients to design and deliver strategic organizational development solutions. Drawing on years of management experience, she consults and coaches on critical needs, including leadership, team building, emotional and cultural intelligence, and specializing in effective communication on global virtual teams. As a researcher and speaker, she's frequently invited to present her work at national and international conferences. Karen also serves as university faculty of practice and on the board of Literacy Minnesota. She earned her PhD from the University of Minnesota and has partnered with the College of Continuing and Professional Studies for over 10 years. So Karen, it's an honor to have you here and speaking with us, and thank you so much for being with us here this afternoon.
Hi there, Lisa. Sorry about that. The slide was stuck there for a moment. Great way to start, but this will give you a chance to clear the palette, so to speak, as you're staring at this lovely abstract design. And I just want to say, Lisa, thank you so much. We have worked together quite a bit, and it's exciting to be back here at the beginning of this important webinar series. Always appreciate the opportunity to come back and work with the university organization and especially CCAPS. So thanks everyone for joining us today. We've got a meaty topic here, and we're only going to be able to scratch the surface. But hopefully this will whet your appetite for a little bit more. And at the end of the session, we'll talk about the upcoming course that we have around this same topic at the end of September. So if you're interested in digging a little bit more deeply into hybrid work, we'd love to have you join us. So as Lisa shared today, we're going to touch on these particular bullet points around hybrid culture readiness and support, your own leader mindset, and then also considerations for diversity, equity, and inclusion, engagement, collaboration, and innovation. In particular, we're going to focus on two main themes within these objectives, and that is your influence as a leader on first, the organizational culture around hybrid work, and then second, your own team's engagement. Now, this can be whether you have a formal leader title or you are an informal leader without direct authority. So much is happening right now. Are you going backwards or are you moving forward? Do you even have time to stop and think about that? What does this balancing act look like for your organization and how are you managing? When I was asked to give a first webinar back a year and a half ago in April 2020, right after our pandemic shutdown, the topic was strategies for effective remote work. And it was a different time and a different discussion. Many organizations were set up to expand their already semi-distributed workforces. Others welcomed the opportunity, and yet others were forced to shift to a new way of working, seemingly overnight. And still others weren't able to join at all due to the nature of their industry or the divisions of labor within the organization. So according to Pew Research, over 100 million Americans transitioned from in-person to remote work during the pandemic. I mean, think about the impact of that, 100 million Americans. Regardless of where you find yourself today or where you think you might be a year from now, there are important lessons that we're learning now that are very unique to this period. So hybrid, to define the term, means a blended workforce that comprises employees who work remotely and those who work from an office or other central location, often including flexible options. Remote workers and teams are also often referred to as virtual or distributed workers. It's clear that hybrid is the future of work. And for so many organizations, it's no longer a question of if, but rather how to leverage it for a variety of reasons, including talent acquisition and retention, performance, and business results. Transforming our future workplace requires reevaluating our workforce's ability to perform well with hybrid teams and partners, with a mix of virtual, remote, and on-site. As Lisa mentioned, we're going to be using some polling today, and it's time for our first set of 3 polls. Remember that you only need to log in one time here for the rest of the session. You select either the text version or the web version. I recommend the text version because it's usually a little simpler and a little quicker. If you want to send a text, that's on the right-hand side, you send it to the number 22333, and you send the message virtual teams. That gets us into our account. And virtual teams is one word. That's important with all of our autocorrects these days. It's not caps sensitive though, so caps or no caps. Or you can log in at the website that is provided there, poll.ev, pollev.com / again, virtual teams, one word. So I will give you just a moment of silence to get that set up. If you forget or you get knocked out, the instructions will pop up on the top of each of the poll slides. And once you're in, you'll know because you will get a message that says you have joined Karen Gotch's polling session. Just give it one more minute here. Okay, that's a New York minute, but we're ready to go with our first test. And as I said, if you're still trying to get yourself set up, you can see the instructions at the top of the page. So those of you on the web option probably already entered your answer. The texts usually come in just a little bit behind. But we have two kinds of polls today. It will be a multiple choice version and a one-word word cloud. We have such a large audience today that we're going to try to simplify it as best we can, but give as many of you, the hundreds of you as possible, the opportunity to play along. So for the multiple choice, if you haven't figured it out, you want to type in or select the letter corresponding to your correct answer. So this is all just to give us an idea of who's in the audience today. Looking at what roles are represented, because that does impact the influence that you may have on your team, although not entirely, because we know that definitely titles can differ across various organizations. But it will give us an idea of whether you manage people or you're an individual contributor, or in some cases you have a different title. Okay, so it looks like, at least for the group that has been able to respond so far, we have a majority either on the people manager side or senior level and above, but a healthy representation across the board. So hopefully that worked out. I know that this polling is new to my moderator, Lisa, so she will try to help you as best we can. Lisa, I would ask, feel free to unmute and let me know if there are some particular issues that are causing major problems. Otherwise, I'll assume that we've been able to figure it out, and I will move forward because we have a second poll to get us started. And this one is asking, what's your organization's work plan for the rest of 2021? You can pick one answer here. I see a couple of chats there that say some people are getting a message that they've joined Maggie Olander's session, which is called virtual. Mine is virtual teams. And so you want to make sure that there's no space in between virtual and teams. So watch your autocorrect there. But if you text to virtual teams one word, that should take you into Karen Gotcha's session. Thank you. Okay, so let's see what we've got here for some results. And it looks like we've got a choice between two. We've got the vast majority of respondents are looking at a hybrid mix, and not surprising. Perhaps that's why you signed up for this particular session, because that's the focus of today. But there are some organizations that are still remaining all remote or all virtual. And that's not surprising either, depending where you are in the maturity level of the organization when it comes to comfort level and desirability for remote work or virtual work. Looks like we don't know what the numbers are for staying all on site or unclear, but it looks like there's a little representation for both of those. My wish for you is that your organization has at least put a stake in the ground for one of these so that you can start to move in the right direction. If it's entirely unclear, then it might be an opportunity to prompt some of that communication across the board. And we'll talk a little bit later about emotional intelligence and leadership and knowing when it's okay to say, I don't have the answers, but I want to be very clear with you that that's the case. So in a global study by LinkedIn and Glint this year in 2021, 56% of employees prefer a hybrid of on-site and remote work. So that is a little bit under what we're seeing represented here, at least in terms of the organization's work plan. But I'm very pleased to see that, because all of the research is trending in the direction of the majority of employees wanting some option. Now, remember that a hybrid means really the most flexibility. There may be the opportunity to work remote or virtually or on site. So some would say that that is the best of both worlds. From a management perspective, you may be thinking, sure, that could be best of both worlds, but I also need to understand how to manage in this environment. Okay, so let's move on to the third one. Which of these do you agree with? So some of you have already responded, moving ahead with the web app there. So the question here is, what kind of support are you getting across the organization? And the point is that everyone plays a role in making hybrid work successful. As a leader, you have responsibilities up, down, and across the organization. I'm sure you're well aware of that. But it's a great time to pause and to reevaluate how things have changed, because it's possible they won't be static, even if you think you've got it down. So let's take a look and see what kind of support you are feeling right now. This is the one question where you'll be able to answer more than one, up to 3, I believe. Okay, so this is great to see. We've got an even spread almost around I could support my own team more and the organization could support us more. And if we had the opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into each of these responses, I'm sure that we would see there are many factors at play here across the board. And it might depend on the size of the organization, how long you've been there, how large your groups are, your teams are. It's a little bit surprising to me to see that you are more satisfied with how your manager is supporting you. I think that's a great thing. And that tells me that you're feeling supported, and that in turn could help you support your own team more. The organization, if we think about senior leadership at the top of the house, is in a very challenging position. And I think that we're seeing that, and employees are more articulating that clearly than ever before, that they've been willing to step up if they're asked for their feedback and say, this is what we're looking for, or this is what we need. And then I do want to acknowledge that 11% there say that everything is going fine so far. And sounds like you might have some strategies to share with us as well. So I'm glad to see that. All right, so I think for the first time out, our polling turned out pretty well. Thank you for that. And if there is any feedback on this as well, again, it's the first time I'm doing this for such a large organization. And so if you can send any feedback through to Lisa, she will gather that for us moving forward. All right, so the good news. The good news is that this hybrid transition has been done before successfully, and maybe some of you are part of that success story. Maybe your previous organization, maybe your competition, maybe certain functions. For example, sales reps are often in the field working remotely, and they're making at least part of an organization hybrid. Global reaching organizations have long had virtual teams. So when I started my research back in about 2010, 2012, my dissertation research on global virtual teams, there were definitely pockets of that happening all over the world. And it's just taken a while for some organizations to jump in or to have to catch up. And even when we're not working remotely, we still aren't always around each other. You know, if you're off seeing clients, maybe that's a big part of your job, or you're having lunch meetings, for example. In fact, according to 2021 Global Workplace Analytics, studies repeatedly show that desks are vacant 50 to 60% of the time. Wouldn't you love to be that part of a study and keep track of how many people are sitting in their cubicles or in their offices at a given point? So we've learned some lessons, and we may need to readjust. Regardless of where we are, on-site, remote, virtual, or hybrid at any given point, there are some fundamentals of people engagement and development that are key to business growth and successful outcomes. These include balance and flexibility, autonomy and accountability, productivity and performance, development and support, inclusion and belonging, connection and collaboration. Sounds simple, right? You've got a lot on your plate, but there are some ways that we can minimize the noise that we're hearing. The difference here and the complexity of our hybrid teams is how these leadership considerations are shaped by many cultures, subgroups, regions, and other intersecting factors. So we're going to touch on many of them today. One group, as I said, the employees are speaking up, and you may be definitely aware of that in your organization. As noted earlier, more than half of employees prefer a hybrid option. But ask me next week or next month, and it could change again. That's the current state of our world right now, especially regarding the pandemic. But whether it's 46%, 56%, or 66%, or even something else, it's a significant number. And as a leader, think about how you can leverage the foundation that you've established with your team and also your leadership in order to craft your own career development path, especially in this hybrid space. So you'll have to be agile. It's a word I'm sure you're hearing frequently, but the opportunities are there for capable leaders. And as you know, companies are always looking for good talent, whether that's somebody on your team or whether that might be yourself, looking for your future career path. So our current state looks something like this. It's obvious from the headlines that many organizations are struggling to shuffle through these options and pull the right card out of the deck, whether that's in-person, on-site, temporarily remote, permanently remote, or hybrid. So one caveat we're talking about today is organizations that are in a position to decide whether to go hybrid. We understand it's a moot point for some professions and industries and sectors, and we have to be cognizant of that. But maybe it's not just about the tactics and the logistics of this change. For some organizations and leaders, it might be about a lack of control in this planning for living in our VUCA world. So some of you have heard of this term VUCA that was created decades ago, but there's never been a more VUCA time. So VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. On top of that, there's a lot of other noise out there, and individuals are struggling as well in their own roles. Here's what we're seeing and feeling from the research: higher burnout, lower well-being, not being seen or heard, too many priorities and changing goals, changing organizational, local, and national policies, and uncertain resources and support. So if you've just joined, grab your mobile device and follow the login instructions at the top of the page here, the slide, for either the text or the web option. I'd recommend the text again. So jump in at any point in time. We've got a few more polls to go for the rest of the webinar. So this particular poll touches on how your employees are reacting to the current plan. The previous question asked, well, what is your organization planning to do? Well, now, of course, it's important to get that buy-in across the board from leadership and also from the employees. So go ahead and give your best answer. Okay, so if you answered A or E, you might want to seek out some more information so that you know how to address any emotions that might be running high right about now. So a few people have said there's no real clear policy communication for them to react to. Valid point. How can we expect them to react? How can we expect to support them if there isn't that clear communication? And then if you haven't asked them yet, think about that. Think about what makes sense for your team. Think about what makes sense for the culture and the norms that you've built on your team. But sense check and find out what is happening. Overall, it looks like, at least in your organizations, the employees that you've gotten reactions from are more than happy for a hybrid option. And then the other largest group represented, of course, is that there's 20% saying about disappointed going back to the office. So there might feel again like there's a turning back rather than a looking ahead. But again, that can vary according to different organizational cultures. And we do know for a fact that some are happy to return to the office. And so I don't want to diminish those responses either, because those are members of our team, and we need to figure out what this looks like to create that collaboration in a hybrid option. So what do your employees want? Yes, it's a challenge sometimes to know truly what that is, but don't overlook the simplest thing, and that is ask them. So increased communication and collaboration goes a long way. The ROI is positive. Again, according to Gallup in 2021, teams with higher connection levels can boost productivity by 21%. That's a significant amount. You as their leader have a great opportunity to shine here and prevent the domino effect of disengagement. And we know that this was already high pre-pandemic. So what they want is to be listened to. It's the same as it always was, but there's more at risk now for not listening. Think about when you've been frustrated and how that can be more challenging in an online environment where conversations can be limited or cut short. So employees don't need perfection. In fact, they want empathy, vulnerability, and authenticity from their leaders. Think about how difficult this might be for you. This is tapping into emotional intelligence. Also, how can you be honest, flexible, and improvise when you need to or when you want to? Those who struggle with ambiguity get more attention, but some people thrive in it. So see if you can take advantage of that, if that is your personality or your natural tendency, or somebody on your team that can maybe step up and help you lead during this creative, ambiguous time. Our forced pandemic pause has caused many of our employees to rethink and reevaluate their priorities. And maybe for you as well, whether you want to reset or move forward. Yes, it's maybe stating the obvious, but we need to do it. Employees want to be treated like people, like human beings. And they're making their presence and their power known with what has been called the Great Resignation or the turnover tsunami. This has always been true with virtual opportunities, but of course they've increased exponentially. So what could make an already unpredictable situation harder for you as a leader? How about losing your talent? And if you are, in fact, granted a backfill, now you're jumping into the war for talent and you're facing other competing offers. So why not get ahead of it and offer the flexibility that so many are looking for? Imagine keeping your talent and then also becoming recognized as an employer of choice per word on the street. What is the true cost of such flexibility? Yes, there are sunk costs. We hear about real estate and other such things, but calculate the high cost of recruiting, selecting, onboarding, and retaining talent. It's significant. Listed are some benefits and concerns that employees have and are talking about rather openly, and also give you a sample of what I've heard directly from people. On the benefits side, they've said, we did this already. We rose to the occasion in unprecedented times, and we delivered on what we were supposed to. We've proven that this work arrangement can work. We produced, we beat our numbers even. We set a record. Treat us like adults and take into account our working preferences. Giving up my commute was an eye-opener. I didn't realize how drained I was. My life is so much more balanced. I work when I'm most productive and actually take breaks. The stresses are different, but overall better. For concerns, I've heard, we need to set some clearer boundaries. I feel like I'm always available. I've invited people into my house on Zoom, which makes me worry about my background, the house. The lines are really blurred. Little things that we took for granted have become hard, like bumping into people, getting those quick answers, or engaging in deeper conversations when everyone's in back-to-back Zooms with hard stops at the top of the hour. We need to be transparent with others, express frustrations and our own expectations, and talk about it. We just got vaccinated a few short months ago. We can't think, okay, it's all done now. We're vaccinated. Now let's just get back to work. We can't lock someone away for 16 months. There's going to be some toll, and we don't know exactly how it has impacted others. We need to be careful and ease into it. So this is true. We can call hybrid a double-edged sword, maybe. The risks and the rewards are there, and there's a lot to think about. I bet you thought we were going to spend the whole hour talking about your direct reports, but do you feel forgotten sometimes yourself between a rock and a hard place while you're juggling the incomplete knowledge from the top and the demands from your direct reports? The same principle of asking, pausing, and listening works for you and your own manager. How can you determine what you need in order to show up as a better leader in this face of uncertain and changing internal and external guidance? This is not the time to pull back from communicating with your trusted partners, whether that might be your manager, your peers, your coach, or your network, or your personal connections. So thinking about you, for our next poll, think about your own development and which of these leadership skill groupings would help you the most with your hybrid team. This may be a tough one because there's no right answer, and all of these land in top studies. So think about the World Economic Forum, Deloitte, McKinsey, all thinking about the future of the work and the skills that are most in demand. For those of you who might have joined late, the instructions for the poll are at the top of the page. You have two options. You can either text virtual teams one word, so watch your autocorrect, to the number 22333, or you can log into pollev.com/virtual teams one word, and that will give you access to the poll as well. I do want to let you know that I have not been able to keep up with the chat. I know that Lisa is doing that as well. We will take into account all of your comments, all of your questions, and we will save those and think about those. And those will be very informative when it comes time for the September class. So thank you for that. All right, let's take a look and see what we've got here. Interesting answers here. The last one in particular, learning agility, managing ambiguity, and flexibility. Now, granted, we are combining these, and there's so much to peel apart here with the onion, but these are terms you're no doubt hearing, and you're finding that would be, if they're not already one of your own character strengths, they would be very helpful for you in managing your work and your own balance. And then communication and presence, how you're showing up. We touched on that a little bit before. Some others, roll into that as well. So how do you show up and be credible, influential, and trustworthy? How do you show up with your empathy, vulnerability, and humility? When you do that, when you have people on board with you, when you have that engagement, that will lead you into successful, complex problem solving and decision making. And again, back to this VUCA world, I think our decisions and problems have never been more complex. So according to McKinsey, people managers have to get back to human by bringing leaders and employees together for real dialogue, to learn, innovate, solve problems, make decisions, and build trusting relationships. They say, quote, "This can't be managed by an app." Okay. So at the core of these capabilities is the need to develop human-centric leadership skills. So it's the ability for leaders and teams to connect, collaborate, and create as fellow humans. Now, you may be thinking, yes, all of these are key leadership competencies, no matter what setting I'm working in, and you're absolutely right. But your challenge is to see how you can stretch your learning agility here to lead and thrive in a more complicated hybrid setting. So if you've got some of these on autopilot, or you've got these as default characteristics of your leadership point of view, you're in a much more advantageous position to help manage our VUCA times. Okay, moving on. Asking for what you need and asking for what others need, listening carefully, and then acting on it can be a stretch for some leaders and for some organizational cultures. So we know there are many different types of flexibility. And so I'm going to move momentarily from a mental aspect to a physical presence. And I'm going to ask you to feel free to try out 2 of your favorite stretches in the moment if you haven't already this hour. Part of what we're seeing with our significant remote work, online work, is that we know that the home setups haven't always been ideal or ergonomic. So I'm going to give you 10 seconds or so to start stretching. And as far as I'm concerned, keep stretching throughout the hour. And consider how you're carving out time for that to create a holistic well-being experience for your employees. So where does that leave us? Will our world continue to change? Well, of course it will. You can think of the acronym PEST: political, economic, social, technological changes. Again, political, economic, social, technological changes. But hybrid work is one horse that you probably won't be able to put back in the barn very easily. Some of you may feel like you're already out galloping into the field, and some of you may feel like that uncertainty is still there. You're not sure what your next opportunity will look like and whether you'll be hanging back in the barn. I could give you many additional stats, but they'd be outdated by next week in terms of who and how much are already working hybrid or remotely, or whether they will be in the future. If you're trying to make a case for a hybrid model, hopefully that case has already been made, but here are a few interesting benefits and facts, again, from the Global Workplace Analytics recent pandemic updates. A 15% increase in productivity due to remote work would be equivalent to getting 74 new employees at no cost. A typical employer can save an average of $11,000 per half-time telecommuter per year. That includes higher productivity, lower real estate, lower absenteeism, and turnover. Now, on the employee side, employees can save between $600 and $6,000 a year by working at home half the time. That's a broad range, but of course there are many variables involved. The average employee spends 28 days per year, quote unquote, playing in traffic. In other words, commuting. So taking into account all of these benefits, all of the constraints we're up against, all of the uncertainties, it's important to step back and think about, as an organization, where do we go from here? There are many companies that have done a complete 180 on, their original proposed work arrangements. There are others that are temporarily pulling back their previously announced return to the office. In the last couple of weeks, we've heard announcements from 3M, Target, US Bank, and those are just the big ones that make the headlines. And while there's a lot of attention paid to how to make hybrid successful, it's important to not forget those employees who are eager to return to the office for a number of personal or professional reasons. Maybe you're one of them. Make sure that flexible arrangements include all angles of personal preference to a reasonable extent. Flexibility doesn't always mean anything goes, and employees shouldn't pressure you to bend those guidelines. I've been asked how to navigate this discussion in an organization that hasn't solidified their position yet. It's a newer frontier that will vary depending on the organization's culture, history, leadership mindset, and vision. So consider these steps. Ask for internal feedback on what's going well for employee performance and flexibility. Gather external benchmarking on what other companies are doing. Be sure to document the wins, both in numbers and stories, to show where you've already made progress. Involve employees. This is always good advice. Instead of giving feedback, ask for their opinion. Present creative, realistic options to the key stakeholders. What works for one organization may look very different at another, or even a regional office. Press your key stakeholders. Find the champions you need. And don't hesitate to look outside the usual HR. Hybrid work doesn't need to reside only within human resources. Continue reevaluation. Maybe agree that this is a work in progress and it's very different for some more traditional cultures to adapt to, or even to consider in the first place. What often comes into play here is what I call hybrid dissonance. That is the disconnect between messaging and mindset for different parties, namely leadership and employees. At its foundation, it's a communication issue. For example, let's say your organization is not generally open to flexible or hybrid work. Yet, have you ever found yourself working off hours away from the office, perhaps on vacation? Ironically, have you ever been denied a request to WFV, work from vacation? Probably not, since you've never thought to make such a request. It just happens. As I mentioned, in many cases, employees are pushing back against their employer's mandates. There is a disconnect between what some share vocally or through surveys. One thing I recommend in many cases is evaluating your organization's state of hybrid work readiness. Where does it fit on a spectrum between an initial reactive and quick response to a situation like the pandemic lockdown on one end, like we're in emergency mode, we have to do what we have to do, to the other side, an integrated hybrid collaboration mindset, or somewhere in between? How can you as a leader influence the challenging conversations that are taking place right now to move your organization along in this hybrid evolution? At a more granular level, what could hybrid look like for your own team? How do you go beyond simple edicts as to what days of the week everyone needs to be in the office, just because you picked one day or maybe 2 days or 3 days out of a hat? How are meetings, projects, partnerships designed in a virtual and inclusive manner? Creative, innovative thinking has never been more important. The ideal implementation strategy simply has not been polished yet for many. There's no one size fits all here, and maybe not even across departments in the same matrixed organization. So remember that we're all doing our best, but it's even more important to be open to possibilities and productive dialogue. Remember, however, that there are success stories of companies that have been working globally and virtually for many years, even decades, maybe even in your own network. In the meantime, target some clear, transparent communication with your team to cut through the noise and confusion. Tell them what you know and what you don't. So time for our next poll. This time it's a word cloud, and you are limited to one word, believe it or not. So try to identify your top hybrid pain points. For those of you who are wondering how people type so quickly, if you're in the website, it does let you move ahead a little bit. The texting one, you can't move ahead until I change the slides. Look at that. So you'll notice that anytime somebody repeats a word, it does get bigger. So you can see a little bit of the proportion of some of the pain points we have here. All valid. And I know that some of you are probably chomping at the bit to stay with the horse metaphor, how to narrow it to just one. Great. Some of you have figured out if you add the hyphen, you can sneak in an extra word. So not surprisingly, some of the ones that we're probably all feeling are landing in the center there in big, bold letters. Pay attention to me, right? Technology, balance, communication, connection, accountability. But look at the diversity on the rest of the pain points. They're across the board. There are some there in work settings. There are some personal aspects there as well. Maybe some are more surprising to you than others. Maybe you would agree with most of them or all of them. So Lisa will be sending out the slides at the end of this webinar. I will, if possible, save these screenshots, and if we can forward that out, we'll be happy to do that as well. Also, let me know if anything that I've talked about today raises more questions because of the size of the group, and we'll be happy to address some of those in future communications. All right, I'd love to stay here longer, but let's keep moving. You've got a lot going on. I hope that you realize that, and I hope that you're getting some support to help you navigate through those pain points. So we mentioned change. It's circling around, and honestly, it's never really left. It's just faster, more frequent, more unpredictable, and more extreme. So not surprisingly, you as a leader find yourself tackling different facets of the hybrid issue, depending on your function in the organization and its culture. So it might be helpful to think about our trusted iceberg analogy. Most visible to you might be policy, procedure discussions, monitoring assets, especially if you're in IT, like how do we keep our hardware secure? Are we tracking employee keystrokes in some cases? Also concerns about productivity. That is, if you're involved in those decisions or privy to those discussions. Your employees, however, may not see those efforts underway to manage the chaos. Now, what's not seen under the waterline are things like disengagement, distrust, distraction, confusion, psychological safety. Many of these might intersect with DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, these potential threats may be pre-existing. So Gallup has been saying for the longest number of years that there has been a dismal 30% engagement statistic among employees at work. And these may surface from time to time. They may also be more prominent since the pandemic. But the good news is that data from Gartner, CEB Gartner 2021 Hybrid Work Employees Survey shows that hybrid teams show greater psychological safety. 66% of hybrid teams report feeling more comfortable taking risks in their role. And hybrid teams show greater equity. 69% of hybrid employees reported that their teammates accommodate their working preferences better than on-site employees. I said we were going to try to tackle some big topics today, and I hope this resonates with you if we're just scratching the surface. Something for you to think about, that DEI is just one of the influencing factors in hybrid team success. In a few words, it's hard to do justice to the richness and complexity of our human interactions. These touch points can include distance bias. So how does the distance separating employees risk being out of sight, out of mind? Cultural intelligence and values awareness. We know that multicultural teams can be more successful than homogeneous teams when there is a higher cultural awareness. Thinking of a broader personal perspective of personal diversity identifiers, considering personality differences, generations, gender identity, education, economic groups, and so many more. And then also development and career mobility impact. How are we selecting who is hired, who joins leadership or a high potential program, who is groomed for a promotion, who is tapped to serve on a major initiative? And one caution that you may be hearing about quite a bit is avoiding a two-tier workforce where remote workers get less visibility, may be passed over for opportunities. It may potentially create some divisions between groups of employees that are more aware of favoritism or unfair treatment. So let's think about how to keep a level playing field by being intentional, transparent, and communicative. One strategy for doing this is to prioritize development conversations with your employees on a more frequent informal timeline, apart from your regular performance discussions. So one thing to remember when tackling some of these new and uncertain and complex changes is to recognize what you're doing well. It's not all about what to stop doing or what to start doing, but also what to continue. So take stock of your organization and where you have pushed or are pushing the boundaries in big or small ways. Our next poll here asks for one word to describe what your hybrid team is doing well. So not surprisingly, in line with some of the research that I was sharing with you, I'm seeing these main themes of productivity, collaboration, performance, communication, all of the things that we often tend to struggle with regardless of the workplace setting. It is true that our teams are stepping up, and we need to acknowledge that they are flexing, they are succeeding, and they are producing. And you'll notice there are others there as well. The all important laughing, being honest. I see apple juice over there. I'm sure there's a story behind that. If you're interested in digging deeper into more of these and hearing other people's stories, keep in mind our course on September 29th and 30th. All right, I'm going to keep moving. Just a couple more slides left. Now, because of the time here, we won't go through these in great detail, but again, you will be getting these slides. And so I just want to reassure you that even though I'm breaking all the rules of PowerPoint here, I did want to capture these for you so that you've got a takeaway. And what we're talking about here are just strategies for you to consider as you're working with your team members. Some of them you may already be doing, but acknowledging the loss, focusing on common connections, chalking the field. Employees want a little bit of boundary. Collaborating in new and different ways, whether that's new technology or thinking about how you can do your meetings differently. Maybe less synchronous. Everybody thinks that we need to have live meetings, and the research is showing that people are being very effective with their asynchronous or on-demand learning and managing time. Scheduling those in-person events strategically, not just for the sake of bringing people together, and then thinking about what skills are needed for future talent needs. Now there's a second slide with a few more strategies here. Prioritizing what you can't get elsewhere. So the socializing, for example, may be critical. Trusting your employees. We've talked quite a bit about that today. Listen to them. Respect their input and their feedback, and also know that they're willing to partner on these solutions. Very important to share that you don't have all the answers, because frankly, some people probably already recognize that. So let's be vulnerable, let's be transparent and figure this out together. We can view this as a learning opportunity. Continuously target a truly hybrid culture. That might be something that your organization needs to figure out and how to define. And then also consider if there will be an off-ramp. Are some of the things we're doing going to be permanent, or are they temporary, and how will we know? Okay, here's your final poll. One word. We've covered a lot in this hour today. What is one word that you will take from today's discussion? Again, how can you choose one, right? Listening and flexibility come in at the top there. Looks like VUCA also made the top list there. That's easy to remember, and it's good to help you step back and keep in mind all of these different takeaways, all of these different characteristics that are going to help you. Someone agrees that the horse has left the barn. Bucatini. Again, there's got to be some good discussions going on in the back channels there. Okay, I'm going to just go to the last slide here, and then we'll turn it over for just maybe 1 or 2 questions. To sum up, this quote resonates with me. It's the fact that we are so short on time. Time comes up in so many of these conversations. And as we are reevaluating what our priorities are, what our own personal missions are, it's important to step back and think about time is the coin of your life. It's the only one you've got. And you want to determine how it's spent yourself. So ask and listen. And again, if you've struggled today to summarize your thoughts in a single word takeaway, I get it. So at the bottom there on the right-hand side, you'll see that course I was referring to on September 29th and 30th. It is online, as are the rest of the other 3 that I'll be teaching this fall. So I want to thank everyone for sharing the hour with me. Lisa, I'm going to turn it back to you quickly to talk about the next webinars and see if we have time for just 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Karen. I'll just turn it over to about 1, maybe 2 questions, depending on time. Our first question from a listener says, can you comment on how to make sure employees that are fully remote are not left behind in evaluations for promotions, appreciation, and also be mindful of the fact that they're usually working longer hours compared to the fully in office employees? So what are your thoughts on that?
So, what a fantastic question. And I would, if I could talk to this person, I would first want to know, are you the manager or are you the employee that you're talking about? And if you are the manager, you're miles ahead of many other leaders because you're already thinking about this. You're already tapped into your talent and how to develop them. So even before the pandemic, there was a lot of chatter about how we need to upskill and reskill our workforce. Remember before when the big concern was automation and AI and how we were going to completely redo what the future of work looked like. So it is all about making those contacts and staying connected and being an advocate. So if you are the manager, how can you involve that employee in different initiatives? So for example, we know that there are many initiatives within our own departments, but there are many that are cross-functional or organizational wide. Leaders are often asked to nominate people to join these initiatives. Think outside the box. This also fits perfectly into diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Do you always tend to go to the same people because you know that they'll step up, it's predictable, you know they'll do a great job? How can you move beyond that and think about giving that opportunity to somebody else? Consider somebody who is fully remote and may not have that same level of visibility, may not have the hallway conversations or the lunchroom connections. Now, if that is you yourself, one phrase we always go back to in my HR development past, as well as many of my colleagues, I'm sure, on the call today, is you want to have a mindset where you're owning your own career. And people are distracted now. So it's more important than ever to have those development conversations with your own manager. If they're not scheduled regularly, propose it. Have it separate from your performance conversation so that you can talk, that you can brainstorm about what that might look like for you. And always keep in, do those pulse surveys, keep in contact with people on your remote team.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. I think that's all the time we have for our questions today.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, we will send a link to this webinar recording to your email within a week of today. If you enjoyed this webinar and would like to continue engaging in similar topics, please take a look at our professional development courses like leading high performance remote teams, or register for our upcoming webinars that are part of our current webinar series on leadership. My contact information is also on the slide if you'd like to learn more. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Take care of yourself, stay safe, and be well.